And I'm going to welcome you all to the book group. Before we start talking about our book, Inheritance, I'm just going to go over the dates. On March 23rd, we are reading Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, Ishiguro. Ishiguro, Clara and the Sun, a novel. That's its formal title. And then on April 27th, we're reading The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. And I want to just take a couple of minutes, not that much time, but to hear if there's any other titles on your mind that have come across.
Beth,
Yeah.
Beth, what was the novel by Louise?
Erdrich, The Sentence.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
I've liked Empire of Pain, the Sackler dynasty. It was good. It was a lot. It was a quick read, not a quick read. It was really long, but it was quick considering how long it is, and it really did teach me a lot about the pharma industry and opioids and things.
Okay. What else? Other titles? Things you think, yeah.
I would like to recommend a book called Shayna by my dear friend Miriam Black. It just won, in fact, she's heading to New York this week. It just won the National Jewish Book Award for book clubs.
Okay.
I just want to interrupt that and say that we are in conversations with her, and we will probably be having her do an author event here.
Great.
So
she's a good, I mean, I went to school with her in high school. We connect every week all the time.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Wow. The book looks really, really amazing.
It's an amazing
story.
book. Yeah.
Anything else? Any other titles? Things you wanted to read, things that people are talking about that you think we should be reading? Okay, feel free to send them my way, because then I'd like to pretty soon sort of get us set for May, June, July, and August, actually, so that we can. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd like to recommend People Love Dead Jews.
Oh yeah, Daryl Horn's book.
I thought it was really an interesting read and put a different perspective on anti-Semitism.
Okay. Okay, more? Anything else?
Can you repeat that title, please?
Is it called
People Love Dead Jews.
People Love Dead Jews, and the
Oh,
author
my.
is Dara Horn, Darahorn. She's a really excellent writer. Her own, I mean, her novels are wonderful, really wonderful. Anything else? Anybody? Okay, well, if you think of something, just shoot it to me in an email, okay? And then what I'll try to do again is put a list together and send it out and wait for your comments and your votes, okay? Okay, great. Well, today we are reading Inheritance, a memoir of genealogy, paternity, and love by Dani Shapiro, okay? And I'll give you my summary, get us our minds all back into the book. I just wanted to make sure that I did start the recording. Okay. So in the spring of 2016, writer Dani Shapiro, she casually joins her husband in submitting her DNA to a genealogy site. He does it. She figures, what the hell, I'll do it. And what is revealed in this genealogy test, the results of this, is that she has someone with the initials AG, who's a first cousin she's never heard of. Her stepsister Susie is not her sister, which then makes it clear to her that her father, her late father, her most beloved late father, is not her biological father. So her life is completely upended by this discovery. She herself just says that she had a powerful, nearly romantic sense of her family, a very large, esteemed Orthodox Jewish clan. And when she's faced with the fact that she's not one of them in a blood and guts way, she's devastated. And She says when she found out, the air became thick sludge, nothing computed, an air of unreality settled like a cloak around you. And then as it sinks in and as she starts to really sort of have feelings about it, she says that she was in a crisis of the soul. If I didn't know how to locate myself in the roots of my history, in the geography that had formed me, how was I supposed to make sense of the rest of my life? So she begins a journey to find out what her parents knew about the process they went through to conceive her, namely artificial insemination and the use of a sperm donor. Did they collude to deceive her? She wants to know. Who in the family knew? And of course, she begins a quest to find her biological father. With the help of her husband, Michael, who seems to be quite excellent at investigative research, she uses the results of the DNA test and a few facts that she knows from a conversation with her mother in order to find out about conception through this process. If you remember, she had this infamous conversation with her mother where her mother says in conversation with someone else and Dani, that Dani was conceived in Philadelphia, and when asked for details by Dani, says it wasn't a pretty story. So she characterizes it. Dani ultimately finds her biological father, the medical
She can stand up all those phones
Dr. Ben Walden.
that are calling into that. You have a screen that's just big as this room.
Okay, and Dani writes to him. She meets him and his wife Pilar, and one of his daughters, Dani's half-sister Emily. And then ultimately, through a lot of a lot of reading and a lot of reflecting, Dani Shapiro really comes to reaffirm the primacy of her father, Paul. So this was a very, very emotional book. And it's, I would like to know what for you it was like as an experience to read. What parts, for example, or part was the saddest for you, the most difficult for you?
I think for me, the saddest part was that Dani had such a narrow vision of family. She felt so distanced from the man who had loved her before she was born, had cared for her, had loved her with no boundaries. And it was as though she dismissed him as her father. I really hated when she used the term social father. I thought, what does that mean? And you know, it extended to her half-sister Susie, who she apparently after she discovered that she was conceived via artificial insemination, she didn't have much of a relationship with.
It didn't sound like she had much before either.
Right, not real strong, but at least they had contact. Yeah. And it's as though she dismissed the participation in her birth of her mother. So her mother was like a non-entity, you know. Yeah. And I felt sorry for her because it's such a narrow vision. Her father was her father, and he loved her so immensely, and she loved him so immensely that it was very tragic, I thought, in some ways, many ways.
What do the rest of you think about what Susan said? Is somebody doing a lot of moving around in front of their computer? If you are, can you just mute yourself when you're not speaking? Because it's making it hard to hear. Well, I don't know who's moved. Okay. Well, so what do other people think about what Susan said? Do you have the same response?
Well, I think she was so traumatized to learn that this beloved father, she always felt other because she was so blonde and people said, oh, you can't possibly be Jewish. And then what Mrs. Kushner said to her was so awful. You could have brought us bread from the Germans. That was awful. So I tried to put myself in her place. What if my beloved father was not my biological father? I would have, I don't know. Yes, you would have just felt shocked and distanced and adrift. But the beauty of the story is she comes full circle, and it was such an evolution that I thought there was beauty in her evolution. But at the beginning, it probably did shake her to her core, because I know I loved my father so much and we were close. And if I had found that out, I would have thought, where do I belong? Who am I? Who is he?
Right.
So anyway.
Right. So does anybody else want to comment on this? Because I would agree with both of you in the sense, I also had moments where I thought, wait a minute, why are you kind of denying the reality of the last 50 something years? But on the other hand, like you, when I thought about, oh, what would that be like to suddenly not be connected to this world of people? And yes, you're right, Susan. She clearly is very angry at her mother. She clearly always had difficulty with her mother. So suddenly, the fact that her father's not her biological father takes her out of the Jewish people entirely, even though she's 52% according to the DNA Ashkenazi Jewish. But clearly all of her emotional connection was with her father, not with her mother. So and when that line seems to break for her, she's spun out, she's without connection and without sort of being rooted to the ground somehow. One thing that I wanted to ask people's sense of was the sense of her looking back and her reading back into her life, and whether you felt you found it sincere that she talked about, as you said, she talked about from childhood being that she was different. It was something she couldn't articulate, right? The very opening paragraph of the book, she's talking about all during her childhood, she climbs on this Formica counter in the bathroom, remember? Late at night, her parents are asleep. She's facing the mirror, like nose to nose with her reflection, and her face begins to morph. And she says she could see a truer face underneath her own, okay? And she has many, many times during the book where she writes about a sense she's always had of longing, of being trapped on the other side of an invisible wall. I just thought she was reading back into the past, and it was hard for me that I just was a little skeptical about that, about all those times where she starts to see, oh yes, so I always knew this, I always sensed this, she's even at, in the very end part of the book, she's talking about the time that she and Michael were considering using an egg donor to have a second child. She says, I sleepwalked during that time as if some buried part of me knew that I was in familiar territory, history on repeat. What vestiges, scraps of dialogue, exchanged glances, closed doors, harsh whispers clung to me over the years, had me feeling, as we tried for a second child, as a child became a goal, as if I had stepped into the rehearsal of a play whose lines I already knew by heart. I had a hard time with that, Anybody else have a hard time with that, or did you think I'm being too harsh in that judgment? Nobody has an opinion?
Well, she talked about, at one point in the book, about overlaying the present on the past, kind of seeing the past through what you knew now. And I think that's what she was doing. And I was a little surprised she wasn't more sympathetic about the artificial insemination when she and her husband were considering an egg donor.
right.
because they had more knowledge, of course, at that time. But
She said in that description that she was definitely, if they did it, she was definitely going to tell the resulting child how he or she was conceived, right?
right, yes, and that's good, right.
Right.
I-
Deborah,
You raise a really interesting question that about how she's looking at her past that stuck with me throughout the entire book, because I can't help thinking about her life. Essentially has been writing these books about her life, and she shapes them into a narrative. And so she's shaping her emotions into a narrative. And after a while, I thought it was, I didn't trust her anymore. I just thought it was a little bit overwrought, and that she was making things more dramatic emotionally for herself as part of a story because she's writing this book. So I didn't trust her after a while. That it was, I mean, yeah, was she aware in her entire life of being the outsider? Maybe, maybe not. It's certainly her prerogative to write a book and say that that's the case. But I stopped trusting it as a real story, whatever real means.
okay. Anybody else have that experience? Yeah, Rala.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Deborah just said. And also, when I look back as myself as a kid, I don't think it's unique of me that I felt that I was adopted somehow. I just didn't seem to belong in my family. I looked a little different from them. I acted a little bit different from them. And I kind of waited for my parents to tell me that I was adopted, which I wasn't, of course. And then later on, I read that this is similar. So having her think that all this feeling all along, I think it might be a natural feeling, not that for her maybe came true, but for me, I felt that for a long time,
Yeah, I think many children may feel that way.
Yeah.
They feel out of touch,
And
out of sync with the family.
The blonde didn't bother me. My grandma was blonde. I have a cousin that was almost white. She was so platinum blonde when she was born and is still quite blonde. So that part, and maybe just the facial thing. I mean, what does a Jew look like? And again, that goes back to generalizations and
right. But she received that feedback from the family, right?
She did, yeah.
Like, where did you come from? And her sister Susie says, she says, did you have doubts all along and did you think about artificial insemination or your father not being my father? And she says, yes. And Dani says, why? And she says, you look so Christian. And which maybe when you look at her, maybe that's true. I don't know. I can't answer that. But I don't know. I felt that she did over dramatize, but she is a writer. She's an artist, which, artists tend to go in and delve into something much more deep than we maybe some of us do. So. And what about the fact that she has such a hard time with her mother and her primary emotional love source is her father? So, but it seems to me that the possibility that that is lost, that there's something not real about that is too much. And maybe that's why we have this, what you people are finding as overwrought or melodramatic at some point, She's not carrying her mother with her in a loving, rooted way as an adult, right? Emotionally as an adult. She carries her father. There wasn't a day, she said, after his death that she didn't talk to him, think about him, So he is so central to who she is, who she was, who she is. And then, right, she doesn't talk about the pictures of her mother's family on the wall. She doesn't talk about, they're all her father's ancestors, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, So, in that way, I could understand why it would be so horrible for her to lose,
Yeah.
a biological connection to him.
I was really frustrated by her because at some point, we need to forgive our parents for all of the things that they do in our best interest, or at least what they thought was our best interest. And I just felt like, Dani, get over it. Your mom did exactly what she thought she needed to do at the time, knowing what she knew. And I felt sad that she never made that closure.
But she was very concerned, when I want to ask you what you think about the collusion issue. Did her parents collude to keep the secret from her? I think.
I actually,
Go ahead.
like, they did this thing and then they lied to themselves, put it on a back burner, and never wanted to talk or think about it again. And it was just so weird that the Santa Claus thing, where she was photographed with Santa Claus, and then it was a nationwide campaign. How weird was that?
Yeah. Kenzie, you just started to smile during Pam's comments. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I've been thinking about, I think anytime we go through some profound awareness, we tend to look back like in our past. And I truly believe that we do that because we want to better understand where we are now. And to do that, you have to know how you got there, like where you came from. Even when we talk about like in our community with racial injustice or inclusion, you really first have to start with where you came from, like what's the history. And oftentimes we don't do that as adults. We get our history lesson in school and we just take for granted that what those history books tell us is the full true story. And it's often not, it's very limiting. And so, yeah, I definitely don't believe in coincidences. So that's what I was smiling about, is like, when Pam was like, how weird is that? It's like, yeah, I also think the universe kind of sends us these signals. And unless we're open to seeing them, they don't register. So I think it's only natural to look back in your past to go forward.
But to look back and find sort of the evidence for what is a new discovery, right? And a new set of powerful feelings, right?
With reflection,
Right.
I felt badly that she had such a poor relationship with her mother, and I don't think she really understood what her mother in many ways gave up. Her mother had a successful career in publishing in the city, obviously loved that life. They moved way out into the suburbs. Her mother no longer worked. Her mother basically gave up her life. And
her mother
Dani
wanted to be a mother.
Her mother wanted to be a mother, but she made great sacrifices of her own life to mother this child. And Dani just kind of dismissed that.
I don't think she can see that. She loves her father so much. She sees her father as being very unhappily married to the mother. She sees her mother being dismissive of her father and being deprecating in the way she deals with him. And I think talk about a story and a narrative here, there's like my loving good daddy and my harsh, unloving mother who treats my daddy so badly, So, but what did you think about the fact that she watches her mother make this false narrative? The mother, when Jacob is born, her son, the mother shows up in the hospital and says, oh, he has a Shapiro nose or a Shapiro forehead or something like that. And then when he's very sick as a baby, she connects him holding his head after watching television. And she tells Dani that, your father had migraines, so you should really be careful about this with your baby, with Jacob. I mean, There is something very odd about that. I mean, the woman knows how her child was conceived. She knows this. So is it a matter of wishful thinking that she just wanted it to be true that she was the biological mother, or she just didn't want, or she wanted to keep steering Dani away from any possible thought that her dad wasn't her dad?
I think we're forgetting that they mixed the sperm.
Yeah, they
And
mixed.
so there's always that off chance, very slight, but if you want it to be, you would project that.
Mhm.
As the mother.
Okay, all right. Was there a key scene in this book for anyone? I know there was for me. That was the emotional linchpin of the book. Was there a key scene or scenes that were powerful for you as a reader, Paula? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I agree with a lot of the things being said, but I really thought her visit to her aunts was beautiful. Is that what you're gonna say too,
Yes.
Beth?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It just took my breath away, that scene, and I wanted to read from it. I thought, I was so grateful for that scene. I felt so relieved to read that scene. So this was on, if any of you have the book or hardcover, this is on, really, one goes like 135 is the first section, and she's talking to her, and this is a short 93-year-old woman, beloved aunt of her beloved father, right? She says, "Dad isn't my biological father," I said. 5 words and a lifetime. Her eyes were locked into mine. I was afraid she was going to stop breathing. Not a blink, not a sound. I feared it was as if I had said to her, "You're not mine, I'm not yours, we don't belong to each other." It felt violent. The world around us fell away. She leaned slightly forward, reached out and grabbed my hand. "I'm not giving you up," she said. The thin shell holding me together cracked, and suddenly I was weeping with my whole body. "And you'd better not be giving me up," she said. Every syllable deliberate. "I'm not giving you up, Cheryl," I sobbed. I was so afraid that I have fewer years ahead of me than behind me, she said. "And you are my brother's daughter." And then, and even as powerful, she goes on to say that Dani is not an accident of history. And she says to her, "You're knowing what you know, you're more of a daughter to Paul than you can possibly imagine." Okay. And she says, "Finding all this out is a door to discovering what a father really is. It isn't closure. You may not get to have that, but it's an opening to a whole new vista." I mean, talk about a wise and sensitive and loving woman, right? Who says that to her. I was so relieved for her that her aunt responded in that way. I was just so afraid that her feelings of being separate and not of the family would be confirmed by someone somehow in the family, So did anybody else have a scene or moment between people in the book that stands out for them, that affected them? Everybody's so quiet today. Ooh, nothing? Yeah.
I have a comment. I usually do yoga at JCC on Thursday morning. And obviously I'm not there. And so I didn't read the book. Was Dani the only child that was artificial insemination?
It was the only child of this mother and father. Yeah.
So who was the parent?
Her father, what?
Who was the father of the other children?
She is the only child in her family. Her father had a first marriage that ended in divorce, and he had a daughter in that marriage.
Okay.
And that is Dani Shapiro's half sister.
Okay.
Who she never ever felt in sync with.
So he fathered one child.
Yes, he fathered one child, and then he and his
mother.
second wife, Dani's mother, were unable to have a child.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So nobody else has any other scene that stuck out for them? Any other part of the narrative? Yeah.
I was going to say that there was a lighthearted moment, I thought, when they told the son about it. I think,
Yeah.
she kind of dreaded that. And I can't remember what his response was, but I thought that was very mature of what I think was a teenager.
Yeah, he was a teenage boy, a high schooler.
Yeah. And maybe it didn't affect him as much because he's a boy and her relationship with him is different than if she had had a daughter and those type of things. But I thought that in it, I think when you do have something that has a little bit of shame behind it, or there's never a little bit of shame. Well, maybe, but something that has shame, like bringing light to it and talking about it makes the shame go away. And so I think, like I said, that for her was, I think, a really pivotal moment. But again, like you said, with the aunt, it was well received on the other end. We always think that, oh my God, it's going to be so bad for me to actually say this. And it not being oftentimes.
Right.
So
then she finds her father, right? She persists, she finds Ben Walden. And I wanted to know how you viewed him as he was portrayed in the book, Ben Walden, Dr. Ben Walden. What do you think? Nope. No reaction at all to him? And her finding him?
Yeah, no, I thought it was, I'll just chime in if nobody else does. I thought it was, oh, go ahead. Somebody else?
No, go.
Okay. No, I thought it was, it seemed natural to me that he was skeptical, concerned, that as an older person, he took his family into account a lot and used their counsel. It was amazing how easy it was to find him. I thought that was a little surprising. But I was obviously happy for her that they were able to meet and could have a relationship. So I think that's what you'd want.
It was very surprising how quick it happened, but they had some clues, and they had this Ferris Institute, right, in Philadelphia. And she did have enough little nuggets of information from her mother to be able to piece things together, And so, but it is quite impressive. Yeah. And then she gets to know him, right, a little bit over time. And again, then I think she sort of overdoes it. She says he at first seems, as you suggest, reticent, right? He's a little on the reticent side. And then he kind of says, he sort of seems to suggest he wants to give it another go, give it a chance, we'll see her. And then they start to correspond, right? And they share things, right? And they find if she reads something, a poem or something she likes, she sends it to him, he sends it to her. They both discover that Wallace Stegner's Crossing to Safety is one of their favorite books. And she seems, our literary sensibilities were remarkably similar, she says. Was that a coincidence? It's like, I want to say, yes, that's how, as I read the book, I just said, yes, it's a coincidence. Okay, please. This is not further evident, but, I wouldn't say that with no doubt whatsoever. I think, as you were suggesting, Kenzie, there are things we don't know about what tie people together, so, but then interestingly enough, when you read this whole book, her father is there, but absent from her, because she's just lost him really with the news about him not being her biological father. But then she says in the book, as she and Ben deepened her connection, her father began to reappear, right? So there's something interesting happening there. And I wondered what you think about that. It's like, she's letting herself start to build something with Ben. She's noticing things. She's taking pleasure in some similarities that she observes. But that's when Paul starts to come back to her. What did you think of that? Did that work for you? Did that make sense to you? Because a number of us have been critical about a lot of the sort of like connecting the dots that she's been doing throughout the book.
You know, last month we talked about the nature of motherhood in Little Fires Everywhere. And I think Sue brought up at the very beginning the nature of fatherhood. And, you know, maybe it just her anxiety level coming down, having found Ben, you know, and then there's so many ethical questions that she brought up that I thought were needed investigating. But maybe just that allowed her father, her feelings for her father to come back to her, because he was her father in you know, every sense of the word except that biological sense. And I was so touched at the end, because who she wanted to see was Paul, maybe in her audience hearing her read. He was always the person missing in the seat. So maybe, you know, having found Ben, it allowed her to bring her father back and to realize I think she became comfortable knowing her parents probably didn't know as much about the situation with the artificial insemination as she later learned that now people know, you know, about the characteristics. And as somebody said, you know, they mixed the sperm. They didn't, you know, maybe Paul didn't know, maybe it was his, you know. So, you know, it was just the whole nature of fatherhood. But I'm glad she came back to Paul at the end.
What were you going to say, Rella?
I think that she allowed herself to expand what family means. And once she calmed down and relaxed, that there was room for both of them, and that she didn't have to discard Paul because he was not biological, that he was really her father. And I think she came to realize that her family doesn't have to be only this or that. It can be all, you know, including all of these others. So.
What did you guys add? Go ahead, Deb.
Well, I was going to ask the group, and again, I'm coming from kind of a negative view of the author, but do you think it's nice how she came around to accept Paul? Do you think she also showed generosity and forgiveness for her mother and father?
I was just going to say that I would have liked to have seen her understand her situation, or come to a realization in her situation that this could have been divine life path for her, and that she started out not belonging, but then she belonged, you know, biologically. She had these similarities naturally with her biological father, and then she had nurture similarities with her social father, as she put it. And some people don't grow up with their fathers, and to take it from acceptance to gratitude, or like Deborah said, like forgiveness, and then relish in the gratitude that she belongs in multiple places. That would have been nice to see, and I didn't know that I saw that in the end.
She does seem to soften a little bit towards her mother at the end. She finds the note from Paul to her mother that was years after they have the baby or they get pregnant, and so she gets a sense of love between them. And then she also, you know, her mother writes that she's so glad. The mother writes to her at some point thanking her for making her a mother and a grandmother. And then there's that moment where, you remember that horror, she finds a whole bunch of papers and she goes through them. And then she finds the letter that her mother wrote to the camp director when she was 12 years old. That horrible letter that says, you know, do this, don't do this, do this, she can't do this, you have to dry her hair after she swims, and blah, blah, blah. This is how we deal with the asthma. And she completely reads it as her mother thinking she's somehow fragile or incapable or something very negative. Whereas I read that, it was a horrifying letter, no doubt. But I read it as someone who was so driven with anxiety and worry about her child being separated from her at camp. She was so precious, this one hard fought for little girl, that her mother had to write this terrifically anxiety-filled, fear-filled letter to the camp director. But for Dani, it was, you know, she felt it was deprecating to her, that her mother's perception of her, you know, was negative in this case. So you know, I mean, we didn't know this woman and we don't know what happened in that, but we do have little hints. For example, you remember the part where she gets a call many, many years later from the person who was a neighbor across the street. And the neighbor tells her that her mother was like always off, always leaving her with babysitters. So, you know, this is a picture, you know, of someone clearly who wanted to have a child, who loved her child, but what we can see was less than, you know, the most loving or present mother.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The question is about the orthodoxy in the book. And as I recall, some phrase where they said it was totally against artificial insemination, was totally against the Orthodox tradition. And I'm wondering if that is true.
I don't know.
If it,
I don't know. My guess is that I don't know. But my guess is that if you were an Orthodox person, you would want the donor to be a Jew as well. You would want to be, according to Jewish law, having a child that was Jewish. And that if you used a donor that wasn't Jewish, then you would not, you know, particularly it was an egg donor, a sperm donor, because it's matrilineal for both Christians and Jews in terms of what the religious law, you know, decides. If your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. If your mother's Catholic, you're Catholic. And that the churches agree. You know,
I thought the orthodoxy of, you know, in the beginning, all she talked about was her paternal line and the pictures and how important they were. And I thought the orthodoxy, in my mind, changed her to believe that, you know, that her parents, not changed her, but I think the parents thought of it as a horrible mistake that they needed to do in order to have a baby.
Well, that's a good theory. You know, they were, you know, the commandment to be fruitful and multiply is very, very powerful in Jewish tradition, particularly among the Orthodox. So they to fulfill that religious obligation, you know, and it tells you how powerful that obligation was, in addition to their own emotional desire for the child, that they went as far as they did.
Yeah, those are excellent. That is an excellent point. And again, it was her narrative, but there are other things she could have explored other than what is the impact on me. It could have led to a lot of, so, and that is only just one other thing that would have been really interesting, having her think about that and what would cause her parents to do that, having sympathy and I guess compassion for why they went that direction.
Right. There could have been a good deal more of that, but maybe that's something also that came later.
Yes, right. That's true. You're right. Yep.
What did you think about the writing? And did you enjoy did you find it in the beginning I enjoyed very much the sort of like whodunit. It was a good detective mystery for until she found Ben. And then the book for me lost movement, you know, it lost pacing when it was more about or slowly developing the relationship with Ben and then looking back. So, you know, I remember writing a note. I was 35 pages in and I wrote a note that I was finding the writing crisp and sharp and clear and effective. And then if you caught me at the end of the book, I was tired and Yeah, I was sort of, there was like a fatigue with her, the refrain, the consistency and repetition of certain refrains. So what did you think of the writing?
I like to say that I listened on audio on this book, but there was one sentence that I had to write out, or I documented, and I'd like to read it because this was, I think, later in the book, but it took me a moment to like understand it. So like you said, I kind of was tired at the end, but so it's the last sentence in chapter 46. I'm not sure where that is in the entirety of the book, but the sentence is, try as I might, I couldn't ask the child I once was what she understood about herself and the grammar of her being before the rules of her language set in. Now that was profound, but like you said, a little exhausting of like the grammar and the language and metaphorically and like all of that. So
it's a lot,
but it spoke to me for sure. I was like, like that's
yes,
good.
it's thought-provoking, very thought. She's quoting someone, but it's very thought-provoking. But I would agree that it comes at a time when I was very tired of entertaining these ideas by that point. So I don't know if anybody else was, but I did enjoy the initial, oh, what's she gonna find? What's she gonna find out? When's she gonna find it out? It had a great pacing to it, and it kept me really in there. Kelly, you've been very quiet. Are you still with us? Oh, maybe not.
I am here, but I read it quite a while ago. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I read it quite a while ago. I remember enjoying it. I remember thinking kind of most of the same things that you guys were thinking, especially with regard to what did she actually feel when she was growing up and what is she looking back on historically. But I thought it was a good book. I'm trying to think of if there's anything profound I can add to the conversation, but I think you guys have covered all the profundity that we will have today.
So let me ask you then, if you feel we've covered all the profundity of your book, what has reading this book changed whatever view you have about sperm donors and egg donors? Because it's different now, but people still do it anonymously. There are still people that demand anonymity. Usually the egg donors, you read about people, but there's no, I don't know if it's so different. I don't know I don't know enough about it these days to know whether you get to check off a box that says, yes, they can connect with me, or no, they can't connect with me. But you certainly
I don't know that that's true anymore. With 23andMe, with all the DNA testing that's available, how would you prevent people from finding out who the father was?
Right, and that's a fear in the book, right? Pilar, Ben's wife, is totally afraid that if someone contacts Dani Shapiro and says, hey, you're on my ancestry.com, I think I'm also Ben's child, that she could have scores of children contacting her husband.
I think I have the biggest, so I definitely understand the desire for anonymity, and you wouldn't have a lot of donors if you didn't have some of those options, especially with inheritance rights, and we're talking about things with legal issues. But on the other hand, then you read that triplet book with the Jewish, what's the book called? With the Jewish,
I don't
oh,
know.
they had only Jewish children that they were testing, and they had triplets that they adopted out to 3 different families and 3 different types of structures for bridges. And they end up coming back together, and you could see the mental health issues and things that were through that. Now, I will say that was a particularly disreputable location that was falsifying information and wasn't providing information on mental health issues and things like this. But that's one of my concerns, is what exactly is being given, how honest are the donors being when they've got either mental health or physical ailments or things like this. And when you get somebody who's got some mental health or physical issue that they're addressing with themselves or their children later on, and they've got no way to get access to more information on that line of the family. It's tougher that way. I don't know.
Don't you remember when Dani Shapiro references a friend who was down and out, living out of his car, having all kinds of problems, and was a sperm donor, and said he just made up the bio, that he was a Harvard graduate, and
Right.
and many other wonderful things, right?
And I do think that they are for particularly more, I mean, I think that they're held to a much higher standard now. They're required to, but still, it's based on somebody's own reports. And I don't even know my own reports unless I really went digging through for my own family stuff. So if they don't even know it when they come to give that information, how can you even ever, have that chance to go back and get some information as to why your child or your whatever might be having some issues?
So if your child is conceived of a sperm donor or an egg donor, do you tell them?
Oh, absolutely, yes,
And what you do?
you do.
So my brother is sterile. He has something called Klinefelter syndrome, and it means that he will always have some difficulties, and sterility is one. And so he has two children who are born by sperm donor to his ex-wife. And that has always been a concern, that and then his ex-wife has a biological child as well. And so it ended up that the biological child told my two, I guess they're all three my nieces and nephews in some ways, but my brother's children, not stepchild, about their parentage when they were about, I want to say 13 or 14. So my brother didn't. And I was always confused about that and thought, you really are going to get yourself stuck in a situation where they're not going to trust you if you don't tell them early enough. But it ended up that they kind of just rolled with it. They were like, yep, okay. They've never looked like him. They've always looked like the one side, but it's not something that's significant enough that they would have, thought that it was something really off. But at the same time, it sounds like they just heard about it. They've never mentioned it to any other family member. They've never talked about it, brought it up, never wanted to search anybody out. I just wonder what's going to happen in 5 years or something like that when they are starting to dig into that. But I think I would, if I had a child in that situation, knowing what my brother's been through, I would have told them when they were about maybe 10, when they were old enough to understand maybe why the whys and the hows and what to do and how to talk to me about it.
What do other people think, Pam?
I have a niece who was artificially inseminated, and their child is a year and a half, I think.
But is the child the result of both parents' DNA or no?
Only hers.
Only hers. Okay.
Yeah, only hers, not husband. And I believe that they're going to tell Sebastian when he's about 3 or 4, because
how do you do that if he's 3 or 4?
There are books like, there's a book called Where Did I Come From?
Yes.
It's a great book for little kids. It tells kids how men inseminate women. And I think they're going to use that book or a similar book to talk about it. And why not? Why not have it be a part of your natural childhood instead of at 5 or 7 or 9 it being a shock? It's just,
That's a very good point. I think that's a good point.
I wanted to say that I think to a degree, I think the problem with that for me is the loss of innocence. Like it's a lot of responsibility to put on a child. And I really don't know how I feel about it. And I don't know how I feel about insemination, but I do know that it is something of privilege. There is not, if you don't have money, you cannot do this process. And so that was noteworthy for me throughout the book of her privilege. And I think with an upper class of people, there is an expectation of perfection. And so you don't talk about it because it means you're infertile. It means you're imperfect. It means you're flawed when it comes to being a human being. And so I just wanted to say that I think in this book, I think the resounding theme was, where do I belong? And someone talking about a book reminded me of Where's My Mother? Remember the little bird that goes around and is like, are you my mother? Are you my mother? And, I think that is something where you can give to a child, but then, later explain the dynamics of how sex works and your sexual organs and all that. But regardless, I just wanted to say that I wanted to point that out, that this is definitely a scenario around privilege too.
Right. Yeah. And it would be interesting also to see, I think she wrote book of 2019, whether time has softened her and how it's changed the way she looks at it. And, you know, remember there was that little note from her mother saying, when she included the card from Mrs. Farris of the Farris Institute, and Mrs. Farris, and she said, if it wasn't for Dr. Farris, there, you know, there would be no you, right? And so you have a little glimmer there, you know, of like how the preciousness with which her mother thought of her, and how special, you know, how would it, and that I'm hoping that, or I sort of fantasize that as time has gone on, she's been able to, you know, just access more of that and an understanding of that. And I also have to say that I also can understand that and I'm sure that you can too, whether it's been your situation or not, the incredible desire to have a child, right? The incredible desire to be a mother. And you just are going to do what you need to do to make it happen, right?
Beth, I was just going to say, I found it a little hard to believe that the Dr. Walden didn't think that there might be children out there, you know, and I mean, as a doctor and an ethicist,
Yeah,
you say that.
Yes.
Yeah, I found that really odd that you know, he would be kind of struck that somebody would try to search him out. I mean, again, we don't know how long he did it. I mean, but he was a doctor. I mean, he knows how it works. So.
Right, but he was also doing it at a certain period of time when there was a certain culture and attitude around it. And no one was thinking, you know, should children be told? Should everybody know the story? You know, she talks to a number of people during the course of the book who say, you know, we just wanted to protect the dads. So we mixed the sperm so they wouldn't know for sure if it wasn't their child or what, right? And then she makes a point, well, what about the children? No one was thinking about protecting the children, right? And I'm sure that the sperm donors weren't thinking, oh, I have an obligation, or the child that's going to come from me has a right to know me or a right to know about me. You know, it was just really a very different time and a different way of thinking about it. But I hope that, you know, she of all people who almost used an egg donor should be able to understand what led her parents to the Farris Institute and why for them, in the way they thought about it, in the time they did it, in the culture that surrounded it, and the science that surrounded it, it was the end of the process was her being conceived and born. And then that story was done, right? And I can understand that, you know.
You know, I think there's a generosity of these men who do donate sperm. I think there is a desperation when you can't have your own biological child and you investigate all possibilities.
Right.
But I think there's a generosity that's an option and that men have done that.
Right.
I agree that there could be a lot of generosity out of a lot of people to do that, but the information I've had generally from folks who are given those donations, they're getting paid, they're in college, or they're needing some money, or they're just like, this is pretty cool. I'm gonna have a bunch of kids out there that look like me. And so I don't know how much, you know, it's a good question. How much goes into thinking about the help that you're doing for somebody who's out there?
Well,
and this brings us back, you know, to Kenzie's comment about you have people doing this for money, for people who have great privilege financially. You know, why does someone agree to be an egg donor? Why does someone agree to be a surrogate? Usually the woman says she enjoys being pregnant, but clearly there's a financial motivation for doing it. So, yeah. But her focus was on really her own emotional journey, right? You know, having received this knowledge in her mid-50s. So anyway. So thanks for a great discussion. We will see each other next in March, when maybe there'll be no snow on the ground in Minnesota, right? How's it look out there? Beautiful?
Pretty white.
Pretty
Pretty
white.
white.
Yeah, real white.
Pretty
What's the date again in March, Irene?
March, the name of the book is Clara with a K and the Sun.
And
Clara?
what is the date?
March 23rd.
Okay.
And then April 27, The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. Okay, stay warm. I hope you guys get out soon and I'll see you.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
Beth.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.